Of all of the vehicles in 1.49, this is probably the one which surprised me the most, and not for the reasons which I expected, because I didn't expect much of it at all, either way. I thought, well, it's a RUF, you know certain things about that, it's 911 based, so it's going to be quick, it's a RUF, so it's going to be quicker, and it's a RUF, so it's probably going to be challenging. Those were pretty much the three things I expected, and I didn't do any research on the car in real life, so I went into it totally blind, ready to be either impressed or disappointed. Well, I'm definitely impressed, because this car is strangely forgiving. That could have something to do with the new physics, it's hard to say of course, but to say that this thing is forgiving is a vast understatement, because not only did you see me driving it in pretty much standard form in my first impressions video for 1.49, but this is almost fully built. And the only reason why I say nearly is because it doesn't have racing tyres. So in other words, this is a 970 horsepower car that weighs about 1100 kilos. That should not be anything close to easy to drive with a rear engine rear-wheel drive platform and a RUF badge on the front. This should be leery as hell, and yet for some reason, not only is it not leery, it's one of the easiest cars to drive of this entire update, which is so weird, and it definitely feels broken, but I don't know if that is broken or if they intended it to feel that way. The balance, the performance, of course being based on a newer 911, they're fantastic cars anyway. To this day, the 997.2, even in Carrera form, so not even a high-level model, but that one that I reviewed years ago in Beards and Cars, to this day, is easily top 5 favourite handling cars I've ever driven in real life, and to have this carried over in the game, albeit with a ridiculous amount of horsepower, is pretty cool. Now, whether that's accurate, that is definitely up for debate, and I highly doubt it. But regardless of whether or not it should be, it means it's a hell of a weapon to use as an OP choice. In standard form, it's 360 grand to buy, which is about the Ferrari Scuderia territory, but certainly not a lot in Gran Turismo 7 terms. It's a 646 or just under 647 point car, so pretty hefty for a road car, and the standard specs, ironically for how crazy you can make it, don't really sound that great. 517 horses is fine enough, it's pretty good, and 1400 kilos, well, that's probably not as light as you'd be expecting, so again, it kind of ties into this idea that I had of, well, going in with kind of vanilla expectations. I fully expected this car to pretty much mirror my thoughts of the outgoing RGT, which is, oh yeah, that's in there as well. And I didn't really use it that much. It's a nice enough car, like I said, but certainly not one of my absolute favourites. This one, well, I don't know if I love it yet, but it's definitely a weapon. That's undeniable. And again, you'll see it here in the race. It flies down the straights, which you'd expect it to, but I literally did nothing to it. And when I say I did nothing to it, I mean I literally just fitted the parts and jumped into the race. I did no setup tuning whatsoever on this car, and that is how good it already is. Didn't touch the diff, didn't touch the suspension. That's borderline unheard of for a vehicle to be that good, at least in my experience, without doing anything to it at all, not least of which a rear engine rear wheel drive Veyron horsepower level 911. So I guess all that is to say, imagine taking a Yellowbird, but then giving it the handling capabilities of a Tomicara ZZ2. That's kind of what this thing feels like. It's, I'm not going to say necessarily quite as OP as the Tomicara. I don't know if this is the kind of car that you'd want to take up against Group 1s anytime soon, although I guess you could if they're AI driven. But the point that I'm making with that is it has everything, at least on paper, certainly when fully built, to be one of the most leery, one of the most challenging, one of the most potentially off-putting cars in the game, like a Yellowbird easily could be. But unlike the Yellowbird, it requires virtually zero focus. You can literally just, as like a beginner level driver, fully build this thing on sports tyres, jump into it, and just win races. It feels like almost a cheat code car. And I don't know if I'm alone here in feeling that way, but I can't think that I am. I think a lot of you guys are probably loving this car as well, and I think that even though the M3 is probably one of the fan favourites, the Subaru is probably attracting the most attention for obvious reasons, the Ferrari and the Lambo I could see disappointing some people given how much you'd expect from them. This one to me is kind of the sleeper of the pack. Even when I was covering the trailers and the news, I didn't see anywhere near as many people talking about the RUF, their expectations, good or bad, or even just acknowledging the car's existence. For some reason though, when it doesn't say CTR on the back, we just don't seem as interested. And that is quite useful in this case, because going in with vanilla expectations, you end up with a banger of a car that is stupidly quick and shockingly forgiving. And to top it all off, it's got fantastic visual upgrades as well. Deleting the rear end to see that exposed exhaust and back box, etc., especially with the race pipes. Deleting the badge from the front end and the little nose intake, giving it that smoothed off look. Speaking to the smoothed off look, removing the rivets from the wheel arches, removing the rear wing for a full-on like Bonneville salt flats kind of speed racer look to it. And incidentally, I haven't fully tested out the top speed capabilities yet, but it's a RUF with 1,000 horsepower, so it ain't going to be slow, that's for sure. But that's it for my thoughts on this one. I would love to hear other people who are loving this thing. Maybe you're totally the opposite and you find it horrendous to drive, but I really don't see how that would be possible if this is how good it is straight out of the box. And of course, that leaves us with only one more car to talk about, the one which I know you've all been anxiously waiting for, the Genesis Vision GT. So of course, we'll talk about that in the next vid. Stick around for that one. And if you haven't already checked out my thoughts on the other cars in 1.49, of course, those are already out on the channel. But for now, thanks for watching.